Hello, everyone. I'm Ruth West. I want to welcome you to our panel on shaping the future of XR in the arts. In this session, we're going to hear from 5 distinguished speakers, each with a unique perspective on the future of XR and its impact on society and the transformation of culture. Our speakers are Margaret Dolinsky, a pioneering VR artist and associate professor at the Eskenazi School of Art, Architecture, and Design at Indiana University; Christine Severson, an executive in strategic partnerships and content for virtual and augmented reality, games, and social impact VR, and currently on the board of directors at the Hydrus; Dunil Hernan, VP of Research and Innovation and Head of Experiments in Arts and Technology at Nokia Bell Labs; Savannah Niles, Director of Interaction Design and Product Experience at Magic Leap; and Nicola Triscott, Director and CEO of FACT, Center for Film, Art and Creative Technology in Liverpool in the UK. Today, after our speaker presentations, we'll have a Q&A conversation with all of our attendees via Discord. You can find it via the app or on the conference website on the panel page. You'll notice that there's links to open the Discord for the Q&A. So thank you very much for joining us, and I hope you enjoy our panel. I'm going to turn it over to our first speaker, Margaret.
Hi, this is Margaret Dolinsky. I want to talk a little bit about the process of being an artist and my creativity. So I'm interested in virtual reality and psychic dilemmas. I worked with The Cave, invented by Carolina Cruz, Dan Sandine, and Tom DeFonte. And I began working with VR in the mid-90s, and the focus of the lab was scientific visualization and how to push pixels and audio over high-speed networks. And we were creating test beds for optical networks. And so we would send pixels and audio across the Pacific and across the Atlantic as a proof of concept. Meanwhile, I was really interested in shifts in consciousness. So much of my work is about shifts in perception and moments of shifts in consciousness. My work and the characters in my work are based on paintings, and those paintings also depict moments in our lives when we shift our perception, such as moments as waking up, or what's happening at our synapses, where we can choose a path to become either humans or animals, feel like royalty, but these synapses determine which way our personalities and our thoughts go. I also was interested in that feeling that happens when you're in love, how colorful the world is, and how everything seems to be in motion. So in virtual reality, I was very interested in the lives of the characters in the virtual worlds. And I imagined those characters watching us and watching what we are doing on their own screens. The images come from my paintings that think about our bodies, our selves, how we present ourselves through our faces and through our emotions. And I took that imagery and translated it into computer graphics. as well as rapid prototype sculptures. Virtual reality affords me the opportunity to live in the world of the characters of my imagination. I also wanted to bring that into the real world. So I created soft sculpture that resembled my characters and embedded the soft sculpture with a game controller. You would hold the soft sculpture near your belly strength and point it to the characters in the VR world. And by moving the sculpture's eyes, you could actually meet up with the characters in the virtual world. So it became important to bring these characters into the world through augmented reality and to set them as part of a stage in the drama so that the screens became characters in the theater and that there was no separation between the audience and the stage. Everyone was all together interacting with the screens and experiencing the music right there next to you on the same stage. My drawings are integral to my work, and my characters become in conversation with the visitors. And so they begin to not only record sound of the people that they're talking to, but they also synthesize sound and repeat it back to the visitors. My work with scientists includes this study into photosynthesis. Here we have demonstrated that the movement of chloroplasts within live leaves actually changes the hue on the surface of the leaf. So we are able to orient the chloroplasts in order to form my drawings within the live leaves. This work was presented at IEEE InfoViz and is published in Leonardo. The research is a different way of information visualization that does not include pie charts or bar graphs, but the data from the chloroplast movement is embedded within the visualization. So much of my work has revolved around portraiture, and soon I began to take portraits of the landscape. And I'm using here a cave cam, which is a gigapan robot holding a stereo rig. And you can see two cameras. It takes an image for the left eye and for the right eye. And it collects an array of slices of the world, which are then stitched together and shown in a high resolution display. This is Tom DeFonte over at the UCSD Sun Cave, and it is a spherical display that allows you to see really high resolution virtual reality. So I wanted to talk about technology and its future. And most often we use technology for social connection, for reaching out to one person or 1,000, or for distraction, such as playing video games. I liken this to our need to validate our being, who we are, and to either connect socially with the world or physically with the world. So our attempts to feel human is what reduces the anxiety of daily life. But in this pandemic, it has been more difficult to connect and move about, so we turn to technology. The collaborative networks established in the 90s affords us the ability to share time with others across the world, as we are doing here today. However, lots of people are left out of the conversation. I think that technology needs to open up to ideas beyond social networks and video games and to targets beyond obvious profitable demographics. Technology should not hone exclusivity because that flattens the imagination and forces us to fit into a subscription. Technology should be available like air or possibly electricity or gas and be affordable. We should not limit the rhetoric of virtual reality. It is a space that can be devoid of drop-down menus and desktop icons, and we should understand the immersion of books and cinema to lead us to a path of virtual reality, but we should not codify VR in terms of other mediums. We should allow it a distinct language that is based on experience, the real experience of understanding the shifts in perception that occur with each moment of recognition, in each decision we make, and the things we hear, the smells that we integrate, and within our kinesthetic senses. We should be understanding our agency within the world, and the world is nothing without our choices to shape it. So I believe that visualization in virtual reality has many possibilities for paths still to follow. Where I think that visualization could benefit us is to provide us with experiences to gain talents, to improve ourselves. We should think of our use of visualization much like learning how to draw or how to play an instrument. We should use the computer and visualization not as a distraction, but as a tool for practice and developing self-discipline and experiencing flow to realize a purposeful life. Visualization is a way of allowing your imagination to reveal a dimension of life, real life, be it aesthetic, cultural, social, scientific, political, economical, and physical. We should be shaping the dialogue of visualization to help us celebrate the truths of being an animal and connecting our planet to make it whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. Very much appreciate your talk. I'd like to introduce Christine Severson, our next speaker.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Ruth. I really appreciate being invited to join this panel. I'm very excited about all the speakers. I particularly love what Margaret just said about visualization and using technology to connect us and not disconnect us. My career has mostly been in content, and I've been working in the XR space for the last few years. I'm going to share my screen. I wish I had had some of Margaret's artwork to use as my first screen, because I think it just really encapsulated so much about what VR makes possible. This is an image that we used for VR for Impact, which was an initiative at HTC where we looked for content that aligned with the UN SDGs. And this image to me just says so much about the possibilities of VR content. Yes, you can float through the sky on a whale and you can bring all of your friends. It's just such an endless landscape of what can happen in VR and XR. And that's why I love working in this space so much. I want to say one word about virtual conferences because about a year ago, this time, March, HTC Vive was about to throw their annual tech conference and in person, and we had 2,000 people showing up in China, and all of a sudden the pandemic was happening and we had to do a quick pivot to a completely virtual conference. What was interesting about that was we had more people show up virtually than physically. I think everyone's sort of learned that now, that this really opens up the audience. But what was really key for me is afterwards, we talked with people who attended virtually as avatars, as you can see here in this image. And we were really worried about the networking aspect. People can't, run into each other in the hall and randomly meet people that they've been trying to connect with. And we thought the social aspect of virtual conferences would really be at a detriment. But what we found from people was that they had more networking experience because they weren't afraid to approach a CEO or a founder of a company, because that person was just an avatar in virtual space. And so they felt much more comfortable going up to these people. It really democratized the experience socially for people. And I thought that was just really an amazing plus to doing a virtual conference. So I hope everyone here at this conference in the next few days experiences that same uh, sort of opportunity. So go up to those avatars, no matter what their title in a company. I want to talk a little bit about synchronous VR. When I first changed my LinkedIn profile when I took a job at HTC, I used the image on the left, which is definitely a throwback image to that classic image of people in a theater using 3D glasses. Of course, now they've superimposed the VR headsets. I thought it was such a funny image. It's kind of a throwback and a throw forward. And then cut to today, the images on the right are actually a reality of what's happened recently. National Geographic, the Grosvenor Auditorium Theater, they have set up a synchronous VR viewing experience where they had 450 Oculus Go's set up with 360 films, and they had everyone watch the film together at once. What I thought was so amazing about this was VR has been such an individual experience. You put on a headset and you're completely immersed in your world. You're not able to really share it. You take the headset off, you try to tell your friend next to you what's happened in VR and what an amazing thing you just saw. And you can't really share that. The person has to have experienced it for themselves. So this was a way for everyone to synchronously see the same film at the same time, and then take their headset off and look to the person next to them and realize that they had just experienced the same thing. So National Geographic did a really great job of having a Nat Geo Explorer. And here I've got a picture of Dr. Erica Woolsey. She's the CEO of the Hydrus, which is a nonprofit that I am on the board of. And we showed our 360 film Immerse. And she actually led the audience on a Nat Geo exploration. She would show portions of the film, have everyone take their headset off, and then have a discussion about it, and then go back into the film and watch further segments. This really encouraged interactive conversation. People were much more engaged. They were emotionally invested. Just anecdotally, we found that the conversations were much deeper and more engaging for people even long after they had seen the film and left the theater. So we plan to do more of these sorts of synchronous dives, we're calling them, since we're all about underwater ocean science learning. And I'm really excited about what synchronous VR brings to the table in this regard. And because this panel is about how is VR influencing culture and art going forward, I wanted to just bring up some specific examples of things that I think are trending and will show that will happen more out in the world. This past year, Burning Man couldn't happen in person. So AltSpace VR had a complete Burning Man world built virtually. And they found that the engagement for this was very high. Even after Burning Man as an event would have ended physically, people still continued to go in this world in AltSpace. Just 2 weeks ago, I know someone did a guided tour of the world, which has become very expansive and large. So I think these sorts of adjuncts in VR to real world events will continue to happen. It broadens the audience. Not everyone gets to go to Burning Man. I think it allowed for a lot of people who wouldn't have physically gone, even if it had occurred, to experience this somewhat in VR. Does it replace the real experience? Of course not. But I think it's a nice alternative and adjunct to these sorts of cultural events happening around the world. That also leads to film festival events and the XR content that's been shown there in the past. I don't know how many of you listening in the audience have had the privilege of going to Venice or Cannes or Sundance or South by Southwest, but it's not a lot of us. It's a small privileged group of people who get to go to these events and see very cutting edge VR, XR, AR experiences. And sometimes they live and die at that event, and they don't go any further. If they're lucky, they find distribution and the rest of the world can eventually see them as long as they have a headset. So what was happening during the pandemic is these festivals had to also reinvent, much like HTC had to reinvent when we did our tech conference virtually. So a lot of this content that was debuting at a film festival actually had distribution on the digital storefronts that already exist for the couple weeks that the festival was happening. So the Oculus store, Steam store, Viveport on HTC's store, they hosted this content during festivals so that broader audiences could see this cutting edge new submissions and official selections. Um, Again, those were sites that are normally gamer audiences, but it brought a whole other group of people to those sites, expanding on the XR community. And I hope these sorts of things continue as we go forward, even as events open up live again, that we have these adjuncts of VR distribution channels. And then just in closing, I wanted to point people to a few examples of some really amazing interactive theater type events or experiences in VR, and other things that are just a little bit off the beaten path. Both Dream and Finding Pandora X, these were interactive theater where he had a mix of live and then people participating in VR and changing the scope of the experience, much like Margaret was talking about in her work, and merging those worlds. I think we will see much more of that. The Passengers was something that just showed at South by Southwest, where the viewer can change the outcome of the experience, not by just simply clicking through physically and making choices, but by who they chose to talk to within the experience and even just gaze at. And I thought that was really amazing. Another piece of content that was debuted at Tribeca back in 2017, which makes this a dinosaur of content in the XR world, but very, very special piece of content. I don't know if you've tried it. I encourage you to, I think it's on Quest now, as well as Steam on PC VR. But people go into this experience and they're asked very deep questions about their experience as humans. What would you tell your 13-year-old self? Tell us about someone that you miss. And you record your answer, and then it goes off into the server and gets mixed in with everyone else's responses, and you can hear everyone else's responses as well. So it kind of creates this collective human thought that's organic and keeps growing as more people do this experience. And I think that is such a key point about VR being so powerful and technology being able to connect us. When you have that headset on, it's such an intimate experience. You feel like you're just alone, and you can kind of share your secrets, and then realize that other people have shared their secrets in this intimate space as well, but yet we're sharing it through this larger collective of the XR community. So with that, I want to close. I encourage everyone to go look at this amazing content. There's so many creative things going on. So excited about all of this and excited to hear the rest of the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you for that wonderful presentation. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Dunil Hernan.
All right, hey everyone, great to be here with you all. I'm going to talk a little bit about bridging the physical and the digital with our humanity. A little bit of background on myself. I have a deep engineering science background, very privileged to have worked across a lot of different technology and scientific areas, software and hardware. And to cut a long story short, after working with all these very super smart engineers and scientists on all these different technology areas, some of the smartest people in the world, a few years ago, I started having conversations with artists. And I realized that after all of my education and all of my experience and all of my knowledge about technology, I actually knew very little, in fact, and that there was a whole completely, entirely different way of viewing the world, thinking about humanity's place in the world, thinking about the intersection of humanity and technology. And all of that new thinking came from conversations I started having with artists. And in that moment, I realized that as much as I thought I knew about technology, I actually knew very little. And there was this whole human dimension to it that I was completely missing, and all of my colleagues and most people I know that are trained in the kind of general STEM subjects are missing. So what I'll do is I want to share with you a little bit about the work we do bringing art and technology together, and I'm going to give you some examples, hopefully to inspire you to think about your technology and your work in a different way. So at a super high level, my interest is, and I truly believe this, that the future of innovation lies at the intersection of art and technology. And, you know, I'm only going to scratch the surface here in this short 10-minute talk on some of these topics, but I encourage you to check out some of our work online, and it'll give you a better sense of how we are developing emerging technologies and how we are working with artists to bring a deeper sense of humanity into how we develop our technology. So one of the big things I'd like to share with you is how, as an engineer, how my thinking about technology has changed because of my exposure to working with artists and their different way of thinking about the world and how to solve problems in the world. And now I actually think about technology entirely through the lens of the human condition. And this is something I never would have come to as a thought process or a philosophy without that exposure to the artistic community. So what I mean by the human condition is there's things that we do as humans in the physical world that we've evolved for hundreds of thousands of years to act the way we act. Our biology, psychology, physiology, everything is predetermined by these things that are baked into our genetics and our evolution. And I'm very interested in how that changes with technology, how that changes in XR. What are the ways we can augment that, and what are the ways that that gets negatively disrupted? And when it's negatively disrupted with technology, what are the tensions that arise, and what are the barriers that exist when that happens? And how can we think through those in advance of this new technology being sent out into the world? And how can we think through the downstream negative consequences in advance of them actually happening? How can we design them out as best as possible? So I want to share a couple of observations. This is only scratching the surface, but this is around how I think about XR and how I think about technology more generally. And the first I want to share with you, and this isn't the hope that it just helps you think about your role in your technology and your art in a different way. So I think, you know, a little bit about the uncanny valley as a framework. And this is, for any of you that don't know, it's a framework that was developed in robotics a couple of decades ago. And it really discusses on the x-axis, you know, how close to human likeness is your solution, and on the y, is it likable or creepy? And what happens is people try through technology to replicate humanity perfectly, and they fall very short. And in falling short, you get these kind of creepy technological solutions, these solutions that are trying to pretend and trick you into their humanity, but in fact, you know that they're not, and it's just deeply creepy. So you can choose to try and replicate our humanity through technology. You will always fall short, in my view, or you can purposefully choose to be somewhere on the left-hand side and not try and replicate that which works extremely well, which is the physical, the real world that we live in. So the issue I see with a lot of people in tech, in research and development generally, is that technologists seem to think, if I just increase the resolution of the visual output, I can have a better representation of humanity, I can have a deeper emotional connection. So let's increase the res from 2K to 16K. Let's go from a 2D version to a 3D world. And then magically they just kind of think, oh, well, higher res, more 3D means better human representation. And I don't agree with that at all. I certainly don't agree with it in general, and I don't agree with it with respect to emotional connection between people. So what I believe is true, a lot of the work we've done, I believe we all live within and we all operate within an uncanny valley with all of our technology that tries to connect us remotely. And we don't even realize it. We don't realize it as engineers, scientists, technologists. We don't realize it as consumers. And because we don't realize it, it means that there are frustrations that are born out of this. There are ways that this holds us back in our ability to connect and understand other people, that because we don't even understand we exist in this realm or in this paradigm, we can't even question it or design out of it. So this is a big part of the work I do with artists, and a big way to give you one example of how my thinking about technology has changed because of my exposure to the artistic way of thinking. So the poor replication of the physical through this concept of high res and going full 3D and virtual, I think is severely lacking in comparison to the emotional connection between two people in the physical world. And you need to be aware of that, and you need to understand purposefully, strategically, in advance where you want your experience or your technological solution to sit on this curve. If you were to replace this, not talking about robots or avatars, but if you were to put an XR equivalent of your XR experience and how like it is to human connection in the physical world, or how dislike it is, how creepy it is versus how emotionally meaningful it is, you could replicate that here in the uncanny valley, and that will allow you to think about your solutions in a very different way. Now, why do I think that this technological approach doesn't even come close to replicating our humanity? Let me give you just one other observation before I go into some examples. So I'm sharing this in the spirit of, hopefully maybe you think about the world in a different way and you think about your technology in a different way. So this is about observing humans in physical proximity. So in the real world, in real life, how do we act as humans? So this is coming back to this concept of the human condition. What is special about our humanity? What differentiates us from the animal kingdom? How have we evolved to act around each other? So sit close to someone in a safe, obviously pandemic COVID-19 safe way. Sit at a distance that's comfortable, a few feet. I'm calling that D here, right? And just pay attention, be in the moment and pay attention to what it feels like to be in physical proximity to another person. What are you feeling? What are you thinking? How aware of you are of your surroundings and that other person? Now, just double your distance, right? Go from 3 foot or 4 foot to 6 foot or 8 foot. And I want you to pay the same amount of attention to the interaction with that person. When you're in conversation, how has that changed? What feels different? So it's my view that we have this invisible, yet to be defined emotional connection, human connection between other people in physical proximity, and that it is like gravity. It's an inverse square law. In other words, you double the distance, the interaction drops off a cliff. So I believe that one of the reasons that when we mediate our connections with technology across a distance, and don't get me wrong, I love tech. Tech has done a great thing to connect a lot of humanity, not all. But we have to understand that just because technology connects us remotely does not mean that it's perfectly replicating what it's like to be two humans in physical proximity. So in my view, when we introduce technology, we actually increase this distance to infinity. In other words, the virtual distance between us increases to such extent that this relationship becomes so small. In other words, it's very difficult for me to have this emotional connection with you over a video call like this, in comparison to if we're sitting a few feet from each other, enjoying a coffee, getting to know each other, and having this invisible exchange as two humans. So I share this. You can disagree with this concept entirely, and please do. But at least I find this as a thought provocation that helps me think about my technology in a totally different way. When I think this way, because of how I work with artists, I start thinking about XR technology in a totally different way. I start thinking about where on the uncanny valley spectrum might I want to sit? Where do I want to be on that purposefully? Do I want to pretend like I'm going to replicate something that happens in real life between real people? Or am I going to understand that I can't replicate that in the virtual, and therefore I need to try for a different experience? I want to look for a different connection, a different way of doing things. And I'm sharing this in the hope that you will think about your work and your technology in a slightly different way. And that is the power of technologists working with artists. And I believe this is the future. So let me give you a couple examples of the work we've done very recently in a human-centric approach to XR. So on the left, you have this typical approach that is thrown out there by technology companies. I kind of refer to it as digital zombies. I mean, it's very inhumane in a way. We're expected to engage with the world through this kind of technology. And I know the technology will improve, it'll get smaller, but this is the kind of way tech people think about the world. In comparison, I want to share with you a short video clip of a work we recently did with one of our artists called Stephanie Dinkins. It's called Secret Garden. This was shown at Sundance just a couple of months ago. And in this work, she uses both WebXR and physical installation to tell the oral histories of intergenerational Black women. And you can view this work online, and the WebXR exhibit of this is actually spectacular in the way that it probes you to explore the space, and it probes you to think about your own place in the world and your connection to other people. And you really leave this kind of having a renewed vigor in how you can go about questioning your place in the world. And I think that could be the greatest power of some of these WebXR technologies.
Where are we going? Does anyone know where they are taking us? The sun is too much. Life is short. It's too hot.
I'll just stop it there, but I really encourage you to check this out online, and both the video of the piece that explains the piece by Stephanie and also the WebXR version. So just finally, the last example, you know, we've seen other speakers talk about and show this kind of an image. We were working with the Finnish National Opera and with an artist called Kalle there, and we wanted to show the opera about the future of the opera and how you can bring in a wider audience in an immersive way into the opera using emerging technology like XR technology. But we had some stipulations with the artist. We said you cannot place VR head mounted displays or goggles on any more than one person in the physical space. It has to be some other more human-centric way to connect these people. We want people to collaborate. We want them to come together in the physical space. We want them to be able to navigate the virtual space in very human-centric ways. You cannot have any more than one VR goggle. And when we set those constraints and we worked with the artist, we came up with a solution like this, where you have these movable physical displays that you can move in a solo way, you can move in collaboration with other people, and it gives you agency where you can enter into that virtual world. In this case, it's virtual opera, in a way that you control with other people. And then the scenes in the opera actually change based on how we use sensors to track the movement of people in the physical space. So the weather changes, the music changes based on the interaction between those people. So this is, again, bridging the physical with the digital in a very human-centric way, and realizing the differences between what happens in the real world versus what can happen and can be achieved in comparison in the virtual. So with that, I'll leave it there. You know, please check out our work if you're interested in this type of fusion, and I'm more than happy to share more if you reach out to me directly.
Thank you, Dunil, for that incredible presentation. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Savannah.
Hey everyone, good morning. All right. So I'm delighted to be a part of this panel today, and thanks to all my co-presenters and to Ruth for inviting me. My name is Savannah Niles, and I'm the Director of Interaction Design and Product Experience at Magic Leap, which is an augmented reality startup where for the last 6 years, I've gotten the opportunity to work on a range of design and strategy problems related to bringing augmented reality to artistic and business contexts. In 2018, some of you might know that Magic Leap released our first product, the Magic Leap One, which is a wearable mobile computer for augmented reality experiences. And I'll let this sizzle reel kind of play as I describe some of the 5 key features of the Magic Leap One. The first is a 3D light field display. The second is computer vision based sensory awareness of the user, of the environment, and so on. Multimodal input, including a 6-stop controller that shipped with the device, as well as support for gesture, voice, and gaze as human input. Spatial audio, which is, I think, an underrated feature of the device. It's an incredible spatial audio system. And the fifth is the ability to persist digital content in the real world, in real world locations. So we sometimes refer to this as placefulness. And together, these features really open up new horizons for artistic, narrative, and interactive experience. And since the launch of ML1, creators have developed some really groundbreaking experiences in HR, and I'll touch on a few of them. Tonandi is an experience that launched with the Magic Leap One in 2018, and it was developed by our Magic Leap Studios team in collaboration with the Icelandic music artist Sigur. So Tonandi is this interactive audio-visual exploration of the sounds, the spirit of the band, Sigur, and designed for a natural gesture interaction. So you can reach out and sort of touch and engage this, this interactive soundscape that unfolds sort of in your environment with awareness of the features of your environment. Breathe is it's a more recent experience developed on Magic Leap, and it premiered at Sundance New Frontier last year. And it leverages the device's advanced user sensing capabilities to engage participants in an interactive and really dynamic exchange of breath. So it visualizes the unseen and it connects people in a really embodied way. Fragments is a beautiful experience, actually originally developed in VR and brought into to AR. It was produced by Atlas V in 2019. You can experience it on the Magic Leap 1, and it features a story of love and loss using volumetric capture. In this experience, the artifacts and rawness of volumetric capture, which typically are viewed as like a limitation of the technology, they're really like judoed to the ground by this beautiful particle-based treatment in this experience. And it achieves a really like evocative, I think, materiality for memory and for loss. And what's beautiful is that you really feel compelled to reach out and touch you know, the material in this experience, and but when you do, it dissolves away into dust, and so it's really poetic and moving. It takes advantage of some of the native capabilities of this medium. But fundamentally, mixed reality and augmented reality offers digital experience in a real world context. That placefulness is, you know, the sort of the native capability of this medium over screens and so on. And I've noted a few experiences on this slide that situate an artistic experience in a specific place. And there's a lot of work in this field, you know, ranging from decorative to kind of trippy, psychedelic to really meaningful and evocative civic activations. You know, although the technology and platforms for this augmented reality work, be it a dedicated heads-up display or mobile AR, it's all fairly novel. It's evolving very quickly, like by the week. But this work in AR really draws from like a rich heritage of new media art and even street art. Some older works I've shown here, I think are kind of canonical in this field of AR, and they really predate mobile XR platforms or any dedicated head-mounted display. And it's also worth noting that while these experiences are all trailblazing and even subversive in their own way, I've yet to see AR technology approach the impact of simple paint on pavement. To me, that's something that we need to kind of keep in mind and think about, like what is the really what is the impact of this kind of technology compared to maybe more classic traditions of street art and protests and so on. So shifting gears quite a bit. I mean, outside the arts, the category of AR is really maturing against some specific constraints in the enterprise space and in business contexts, where use cases like guided instruction, remote collaboration, augmented place, they bring these native capabilities of the medium to solve real world problems. And creativity loves constraints. It's these constrained use cases and the needs of certain enterprise contexts against which those of us working on the platforms themselves can really innovate and solve like the paradigmatic unknowns of interaction and perception in this new kind of computing. But activating artists from day one to develop and really stretch this new technology is crucial to its development, to the development of the fundamental technology and platforms. Neri Oxman, a professor at the MIT Media Lab, her work is really spans many disciplines of science, art, and design. She uses this analogy of the metabolic Krebs cycle to describe like the crucial role that artists play in developing a new technology. Paraphrasing her, she says that the role of science is to convert information into knowledge. And the role of engineering is to convert knowledge into utility. The role of design is then to convert utility into human behavior. And the role of the artist in art is to question human behavior and to shift our awareness of the world around us, you know, and convert behavior into new perception of information that then sparks new scientific exploration and discovery, and the cycle continues. The challenge, though, with activating artists in sort of developing and bringing their practice to wearable AR and even, you know, to a lesser extent, mobile AR, is really like a number of challenges. There's a skill set gap. There's a high cost to developing on these platforms. You know, real-time 3D is really a challenge. It's a challenge for any one person to have the broad range of skill sets needed to develop or refined experience in real-time 3D. Developing those assets is very expensive and time consuming. Distribution is a challenge. The availability of hardware, a lack of mature tools and learning. And all of this, I think, is just symptom of how emerging this technology is. We're still in its very early days. To me personally, WebXR and platforms like Eighth Wall and other sort of development tools like Lens Studio for mobile AR experiences, these are enormously important because they lower the barrier of entry in terms of enabling creators to develop experiences on their own or in small teams. And they also enable broad distribution, since the web is fundamentally cross-platform, and modern, almost all sort of modern mobile phones are capable with these really advanced sensors for mobile AR experiences. And notably, there's a number of organizations doing really incredible programming and funding for creators in XR. I've shown a few of them on screen here, especially creators in underrepresented groups. In San Francisco, Gray Area does excellent programming, as does our lab based in New York. And Filmgate Miami, based where I'm based here in Miami, also is really supporting, bring a lot of artists who are bringing their practice into this new frontier, as is the National Film Board of Canada and MUTEC and the ACT and a few other organizations based in Montreal. In fact, I've had the honor to work with a few of these organizations, Filmgate Miami, the National Film Board of Canada, MUTEC, and others, to develop they've led it. I've been able to just, support them that they've developed a grant and a residency program aimed at supporting 6 women identifying creators to develop narrative experiences in mixed reality. And a fun part of this, it's called the New Narratives Lab. And a fun part of this lab, something that's really exciting to me, is that these creators, they are not coming from augmented reality. They're coming from other disciplines. And they're really, sort of, the program is really, collecting resources and developing curriculum to allow these artists to really bring this new technology to their practice. That to me is so exciting, because that really is an opportunity for us to develop more material and distribute that material to artists who really want to get involved in this field. And with that, if you're interested in mentoring as a part of this program or supporting artists in any other way, please get in touch with me and we can get you plugged in. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, Savannah, for that presentation. I'd like to introduce Nicola Triscott, our next speaker.
Hi, everyone. It's really good to be part of this panel with these great practitioners. I'm the chief executive of FACT in Liverpool, where I've been in post for 20 months. FACT is the UK's leading organisation for the support and exhibition of art and film that embrace new technology and explore digital culture. Our activities are guided by the questions of what new technologies and science mean for our lives now and in the future. And we enable artists and young people to explore and experiment with art and technology. I'm interested in enabling artists to explore their concepts through technology and to access, experiment, and create with new technologies and collaborate with technologists. But then as a curator, I'm also very interested in how that work finds and engages audiences and participants. What are the special characteristics of VR and AR and XR that engage audiences in distinctive ways? At FACT, our audiences are predominantly under 35, and literally have a lot of people in their teens and early 20s. They're often seeking out new experiences and a sense of interaction and immersion, and they really embrace technologies like VR. When the technology is VR, often artists that we work with want to create entire environments within which the VR experience sits and is part. So an example here is Anna Bunting Branch's Warm Worlds and Otherwise from FACT's 2019 exhibition, You Feel Me. FACT's got a track record of artistic experimentation with a range of technologies throughout its 16-year history. However, for this presentation, I thought I would focus specifically on FACT's work with young people, 11 to 17-year-olds using art and technology, and how we've had to adapt this work during the pandemic. So this project is called Why Can't We Do This in Real Life? It's one we did pre-pandemic in 2019 during my first year at FACT. And this was a new VR work by artist Megan Broadmeadow in collaboration with an intergenerational group of young people in over 60s. So she worked with young people aged 11 to 15 years from 3 youth clubs and a school in Dingle, Liverpool, which is one of the most deprived areas of the city, and with Facts over 60s group, the digital ambassadors. And this intergenerational group together explored the issue of violence in video games, focusing on the game Red Dead Redemption 2. And this is a Western themed game set at the end of the 19th century. And within the game, the player meets several suffragettes. And in one case, it's possible to assault and kill one of the campaigners. So several YouTube creators took advantage of this to post recordings of the game's protagonist killing the suffragette in a series of very gruesome ways and joking about being able to assault an annoying feminist in this way. And it provoked quite a furore online, with YouTube taking down the videos and then reinstating them. So this new participatory work centered on the notion of trying the case in a courtroom in real life. And it was a new way of working for our learning, both in terms of the intergenerational approach and in working with a contemporary artist specifically towards an artwork that was going to be exhibited within one of FACT's main exhibitions. So we found that working with VR has proved to be a huge motivator for the young people. Most of the group, I'll just go back to the voting booth there a minute. Most of the group already had some experience of making films and performing from their work with FACT, and they were really keen to see what they could do with VR. So Megan usually collaborates with professional dancers and performers to improvise movement-based performances for VR, and she was able to share this practice with the young people. They learned to devise performance in the round and to work in response to the courtroom setting in a 360 setting. And they were able to take what they'd learned with Megan and share it with the over 60s group when they joined them to collaborate on the project. And maybe it was the transformation of an old courtroom through lighting, direction, and performance that made the experience feel more like a music video, but it meant that the young people were less worried about locking down the narrative and were more open to creating characters and scenes and moods. And this gave the whole group a chance to explore questions around ethics and responsibilities for actions in gaming in a more oblique and poetic way. And I'm going to try and share just a little bit of the video.
Look, I am the law. I am fighting the war of systematic problems that have happened before. The children are killing for sports. They're using computers to cause the humanized dooming, distorted delusions, the force, abuses, consuming consumers. Of course, the system is glitching because killing's the norm. I am the devil stuck in your hand. I am the human. They don't understand. I am the problem that they command. If life is but a game, then what is pain?
OMG, didn't you see? It was on white tee.
Wait, DRB. Let me check FB.
Funny. They keep doing it time and time again. Crimes against the character, for this we will not stand. Murder is murder, of this we are told. Except when the weapon is attached to a console. Games channel violence, violence we desire. Attack on virtual bodies, punch, kick and set on fire. Pain, well, it's just our domain. Online, not IRL, so why should we feel ashamed? I am the devil, stuck in your hand. I am the human, they don't understand. I am the problem that they command. If life is but a game, then what is pain? OMG, I can't even.
So the other project I want to discuss is from 2020 during the pandemic. And this is a project called Augmented Empathy. It was commissioned from a young artist collective called Kaiken, using social media as a space to collaborate and rethink how we identify and connect ourselves, each other, animals, and the earth. It was initially intended to take place face-to-face, and then, of course, the entire participatory project had to be adapted for an online delivery during the extended lockdowns. So they worked online with a group of young people from a youth club in Toxteth, and doing this produced 4 Instagram filters which alter the viewer's appearance to become more animalistic or otherworldly, together with questions and challenges. And the filters and Instagram TV pieces that they produced were really popular on Instagram. The success of this project and our need to replace what had originally been planned as a VR-heavy learning zone in our foyer gallery when we reopened the building in September led us then to commission Kaiken to develop a physical exhibition. And the installation brought the Instagram filters designed by the artists and participants into the building as touch-free, socially distanced interactive pieces. And this was accompanied by 2 new film works based also on the participatory project. Sorry, I've got a slightly over-enthusiastic touchpad here. The main film introduces Sakima Crook, a performer and one of the lead voices in Black Lives Matter, particularly the Black Trans Lives Matter movement. The demonstrations in London in June last year, and the film spreads a message of love and empathy and kindness. The original project was intended to culminate in a performance, and we also had to adapt this as a COVID-safe performance centered on Sakima's dance and enhanced for the audience by AR effects, which were triggered by tattoos. Most of the young people who participated in the project came along to the performance.
Oh, it's amazing.
Kaiken and the learning team then produced an online tutorial, which we've been using to deliver a really hugely popular ongoing series of workshops for 11 to 16-year-olds in schools on how to use Spark AR to create filters. We found that introducing young people to filter design through Kaiken's practice, young people clearly see AR filters much more as real things meshed with their everyday social lives. And they take to filter design really intuitively. They just dive straight in and start making, usually before the demo is even finished. And when they're asked to digitally sculpt a face for a filter that's part human and part non-human, they just run with it as though it's a really normal thing to do. When they've been asked then to appraise their designs, they tend to do so in the context of their social life. So how wearing a filter in real life would affect how people treat them and how they might treat someone wearing it. So our work during COVID has, I think, raised a lot of questions for us about VR in its current form and whether we need to shift to contactless technology in the future if, as seems quite likely, either this pandemic continues to ebb and wane or new pandemics arise, and perhaps it's more about different types of immersive experiences using movement triggers or handheld devices. And I think it's really interesting, this shift from the first project to the second project. And we're doing a lot of thinking about how we take this forward.
Thank you, Nicola, so much for your presentation. I would like to not only thank all of our speakers, but also open up the conversation with our attendees. I know that we have a significant number of attendees on our stream. And until we hear from you on Discord, please post your questions on Discord. I know that Margaret has some questions, so I'd like to just open up for Margaret to, she's got some questions for our fellow panelists. So if you could just jump right in and we'll get going.
Hey, everyone. As a response to Nicola's presentation, I like that idea of how the students felt very comfortable being part human and part computer graphics. And I would like to ask everyone, how has XR helped you deal with the pandemic, and how XR has helped during this pandemic?
I can comment a little bit here, just from a career point of view. I've been able to, we're all working remotely. I started a new job in June. I've not been able to physically meet my new teammates, but we can meet in VR and have that sense of actually being in the same virtual space and walk away with really feeling like we have met in person. And then just with our work at the Hydrus, a nonprofit that I'm on the board of, we're really digging in deep with distance learning VR applications that are valuable right now, but I think will also be valuable in the future as well.
I was really curious about the festivals, the Burning Man and the Venice VR, and how that recontextualized those experiences. Can you say a little bit about that?
I haven't been to Burning Man myself personally, so I can't speak to the difference between having attended and AltSpace VR. But the AltSpace VR was very, it felt very community oriented. Everyone, it was just really, it was just felt like being in a social space for a very specific reason with like-minded people. So it was just a nice reprieve from sort of the, pandemic life and being able to do something very different. And then as far as film festivals, I mean, so many of us that do that for our career and being able to go in person, it was such a letdown not to have those things happen this past year, but being able to have access to that content online was really important. It felt like things were still moving forward. People were still creating. There was still a sense of XR community. And I think that was really an important aspect of having that content available online.
Yeah, I felt I had a wild experience during the pandemic where I was in a basically like a VR rave. And it was never something I would have tried under non-pandemic conditions. And it was a really wild experience. And while I was there, I heard a voice that I recognized, and I basically ran into a friend that I knew from real life in this VR rave just by recognizing his voice. And it was the kind of experience that you might have if you're at an actual party and you hear your friend's voice and see them and you say, oh, hey, what a coincidence, you're here too. But it was happening in this like noumenal realm of like a virtual party, and everybody was like embodying a different character, and like it was really strange. It was hard to describe like how like life it was and how unlike life it was. So it was a pretty wacky experience. But on a more serious note, I think something really important that came out of the last year was how many integrations to existing quote unquote like legacy collaboration tools like web conferencing and VR live events and platforms happened, where now we have more of the kind of tools and the integration infrastructure needed to be able to pull off events that have like a digital footprint across many, many different platforms, both XR and not. And I think even, hopefully beyond lockdown days, we'll be able to benefit from those kinds of new patterns and practices established.
Yeah, I'm really excited by what I'm seeing with the broader kind of engagement and adoption. And Nicola, in your presentation, just the opportunity for expanding access. But I am also concerned, and I want to pose it to, I know Savannah, you talked about this a bit, about the access, a broader access to what it takes to truly develop kind of the higher end experiences and be able to distribute them. And I think it's been a concern of mine of whether or not, consumption is going to be the ultimate and only driver. And then that brings into play what Duna was talking about in terms of how do we humanize the technology in a way that empowers us. So to me, there's this tension between what the economic drivers are and what it takes to realize this work, and at the same time accessibility. So I'd like to pose it to any of you that would like to respond to that kind of direction.
Maybe I'll comment on the two questions together. So I think in a crisis, right, in a pandemic, anything is better than nothing. But I think we should be very, very careful in accepting the current state of play with the technologies that we are being forced to use. And by the way, the forcing of it has been accelerated because of COVID, but these are the same technologies that were in play prior to COVID. And we should be very careful as consumers and as technologists and as artists, being thinking about deeply that which is put upon us by companies, big tech, and that which is rewarded by the market. Now, we can't go into it here. It's too big and kind of horrible of a discussion, but there is power in us as consumers if we can kind of understand and think about, you know, why is it that we're tending to flick through millions of videos and posts on Facebook, and what is it that someone else is getting out of monetizing my existence? So it's that kind of side of things that I think a lot about now. So that's kind of one answer. So I think fine in the absence, you know, in a crisis, yeah, the tech is okay, XR is doing whatever, it's allowing us to do things we couldn't otherwise, but we shouldn't just accept that that's as good as it gets, and we should always be pushing for, you know, what is it ultimately the best thing for our humanity. The second, what was the second question? Sorry, your question.
Well, actually, so you know, you covered that part of it. I have a great concern as well about. So I'll give an example. You know, the students that work with me, they're very concerned about the fact that they have to log into their Quest device with their Facebook account, and these are young people who are literally saving up for alternate headsets because they have this sense of that requirement. And they had just bought new devices, for example, that requirement somehow feels like it's not right to them. And so I think, you know, we have a great sensitivity as being engaged in both developing the technology and developing experiences, that this is a real challenge. And so I know this is part of the reason why I brought all of you together, because you have a unique point of view, having really dealt with what it takes to create high-end experiences and bring them to a broad public, and what it means for our future.
Yeah, so maybe I'll answer the second one after you reminded me. I think, you know, and I'm, you know, I guess I'll ask people to take what I say with a grain of salt, but I'm extremely particular about my digital experiences. And I find most AR and VR immensely boring and immensely gimmicky. And the best experiences I've had is through a web XR. You know, you can access it if you have some connection to the internet and some device that allows you to view, which at least in the developed world, a lot of people have, but it's becoming, you know, proliferating more and more globally. And you just go into a simple web XR experience, but when it's designed not for the most expensive tech and not for those of us that are the most privileged in the world, but when it's designed in a way contemplating everyone and everyone's accessibility and everyone's experience in the different cultures, and I found them the most basic technological of experiences being the most compelling from a human point of view. And we always in technology, we always tend to overcomplicate things. We always tend to privilege the technology over everything else. And I'd love to see a mass movement on that angle and that approach changing somewhat. And then if that changes, then the accessibility concern will change with it, I believe.
Yeah, I agree that mobile AR has arrived. Like, it's here, and people are experimenting with it artistically, but also I think it's starting to become something that the everyday consumer is pretty familiar with, either through like a fun face filter on Snapchat or Instagram, or over like an increasing number of mobile AR e-commerce experiences. Just the other day, a friend sent me a picture of there was like a very local hot tub shop that had implemented using WebXR, basically like a place your virtual hot tub on your yard and see how it will fit, like one of those AR augmented reality shopping experiences. But this wasn't like this was like a small local place. The technology is so accessible that this like small business was able to like deploy augmented reality against their needs and create this new shopping experience. And it's that to me is actually really significant. It's like that ran on a web browser on anyone's phone using emerging open standards. To me, it's really powerful, and it is like it's arrived, it's here.
Yeah, the young people we work with don't even get the term augmented reality, but if you talk about Instagram filters or Pokemon Go, or like they just take it for granted already, and you know, makeup tutorials where you can try on different face. One of the Kaikin Instagram TV experiments was put out as a makeup tutorial, and then the filter just distorted their face into this animalistic thing, and they just take that kind of thing completely as part of their normal lives.
Yeah, I do, Ruth, grapple a lot with just, you know, the so much screen time, and you know, our careers are about looking at screens and living in screens, and you know, how good is that actually for, you know, human existence. But I think it comes back to like the use of any kind of tool. You either use it, you know, in a moderated way that enhances your life, or you let it take over and become obsessive, and it becomes detrimental to, you know, your normal human existence. So I think it's, you know, it's keeping that in mind as we, you know, introduce all these new technologies, that there's a balance, of course, and we're still human organic creatures that need to live in an organic way. So but it's something that always we need to keep in mind, for sure, that, you know, we don't live in these screens and it becomes normal life for us. I don't think that's healthy.
Yeah, you know, I think that there is, I believe, an issue of kind of equity, and not only in access and in content creation, but in terms of how we connect. And I was highly impacted by Dunil's observations, and aware of the physical distancing. I hadn't thought about it as that inverse square law, but I'm going to take that back, because there is a different type of engagement. And while at the same time, it does feel empowering to be able to attend and engage broadly, you know, and it's more comfortable to be virtual. At the same time, I'm finding that there is something that can't be accomplished, and I can't quite put that into words. So.
I found that a lot of the most successful projects are ones like the performance that have managed to bring people together in a social space, or online if they're bringing people together socially. That's always been the most impactful during this lockdown. And yeah, it's revived in a way, my commitment to what I do, because I think the pandemic started and we're all like, well, why are we in the arts? We should have trained as doctors or paramedics or something important and useful. But the absence and how our audiences and our participants have responded to the work that we've put out, and when we have opened, has been so enthusiastic and so warm. It's really made me feel good about the work that we do and understand how important it is. Even we do this prisons program, and even the prison governor got in touch to say, could we keep going with something? And remarkably, we've been doing it through letter writing, but remarkably, he's trying to get email access for the prisoners so that we can do more direct projects with them. So I'm moving a long way from VR and XR, but I'm talking about art and how important it is as a social experience and a social space for people, and how the lockdown has really brought that to the fore in my mind.
Thank you. I'd like to share out a question from one of the participants via the Discord. It reads, I like the idea, this is for Dunil, I like the idea that all of technology exists in the uncanny valley. It seems a little strange that we would try so hard to replicate physical reality when XR can be or is markedly different from physical reality. If conducting research from an arts and science perspective, do you have ideas for framing questions researchers should ask their participants that are different from the typical ones that are asked, ones that try to capture how much like physical reality the virtual experiences are? Yeah,
I think this kind of brings me onto a topic I kind of harp on a lot about, but you know, human-centric design has become a bit of a buzzword out of the design thinking methodology. And design thinking is very powerful because it's a generalized framework, and it means that you democratize the design approach through the 5 principles in design thinking. And one of them is to empathize with the user, right? So it's important to note user there. And they talk about human-centric design, but when you actually get into it deeply with designers, what they do is they observe and question a user while using that particular product, largely. Now, for me, human-centric is a very different thing. It's back to thinking about the human condition. What is unique about our humanity? How have we evolved? What is special about humans in physical proximity? How do we use our hands to manipulate matter? How do we use our voice to express ourselves? What are all the side channels of communication beyond the spoken word that enable us to communicate in an emotional way? And there's all this depth and nuance that we largely go through life ignoring. We know it so well, it's so natural that we don't question it. But when I'm working with engineers and scientists, people that are researching this, I ask them to probe very deeply, question everything. When you go into the supermarket, why is that product placed there to be the very first thing you see? Why does that product have that type of color? And I don't care about product packaging or product design. I'm just trying to help people think, why is that social media application asking you to do that thing that way? Why are you scrolling that way with your thumb? Why? Why are you existing as a human? Why do you interact with other people the way you do? And I think that's largely missing in the physical sciences and the kind of sciences we've been talking about that develop these technologies that go out to the world. And I think you should just, what I find happen, as I touched on it earlier, people take the paradigms of the physical world and they basically try and replicate them in the virtual. And I find that absolutely bizarre. I mean, I think we could have superpowers and extrasensory perception. And why am I limited by gravity in the virtual? Why do I have to communicate with you visually? I mean, think about that. Why is everything we do technologically largely in modern days visual? Why can't I communicate with you in a totally different way? So I ask all these questions, think about it deeply. Don't just accept, don't just do because that's the way others are doing. Think and question, and always question through the lens of humanity, not as a user, not as a segment of the population, but me as a person and how I interact with other people and what is special about that. And then think about your technology through that lens. And I find that to be inspirational for me personally, and it gives an extremely unique viewpoint on how you think about and develop technology. And I'd love to see more of that.
Just a quick note in response to also, thank you so much, Juno, for that. In response to the question about, asking kind of structured research questions, in our lab, we've done some work on developing new models of presence, and we did some research, a couple different studies, and very often what Nicola was discussing about young people being very familiar and comfortable with the digital overlay within the physical augmentation. They're actually, when you look at what people say about what they would like in their experiences, they do want the augmentation. Like Dunal was saying, like, why not give us extrasensory kind of capabilities through this technology and really kind of ground them in our humanity and our physicality, but expand our awareness. And so, and it was actually something that people were really interested in, this whole notion of both being here and being there, or how real it feels to us. So I think that there's incredible potential, but there's a huge challenge in that because it's so ephemeral. And I think it's something that possibly, Savannah, you could, speak to kind of the design of these ephemeral experiences and how they trigger some different sensuality.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's like a fundamental, at least for mixed reality, and I think it is maybe a different cognitive experience being in virtual reality, but in augmented and mixed reality, like more and more, the more time I spend with the problems, I realize the fundamental challenge is about human attention and focus, and because fundamentally the the promise of augmented and mixed reality is to allow you to have an experience very present in a real world context, and that digital experience is adding value there. So fundamentally, you are dividing your attention between the real world and the digital. That is like obvious when we say it, but I've noticed for years designing interfaces and experience for AR, there is this surprising thing that happens when something that you sketch out on paper or in Figma or Photoshop or whatever in Unity, rendering on your laptop screen or something, once it gets onto device and you're looking at it in a heads up context and with the real world, in all of its bandwidth, they're rendering, quote unquote, alongside application content in your mind. You realize like how high cognitive load it is to be in an AR device, and how we have to make interfaces that are much simpler and that in a much more precise way orchestrate user focus and attention. So I think it is like a different cognitive experience to encounter, anything in AR or mixed reality. And I think we're scratching the surface as far as new paradigms for visual feedback, for interaction, for typography, for responsive layouts, and so on. Just the very basics and fundamentals of experience and interaction design in the medium.
I'd like to just kind of bring together a few themes, thinking about cognition, extreme cognitive diversity, and also change in consciousness, and in relation to kind of a notion of equity and inclusiveness. Are any of you concerned regarding, the monetization, or like if we're already in our online worlds, in some senses, trying to juggle and manage privacy in relation to advertising exposure? For example, like what's it going to be like when in some way, shape, or form, it's completely immersive, and designed to be part of our physical experience and our conscious, like an alteration of consciousness. Just want to put that out.
I think it's really about the words that we use. When we say things like participant and user, it dissociates us a little bit from the world. I like to think of us as visitors. And then even the term world or environment concretizes where we're at immediately. I try to tell my students, don't think of it as an environment, even though I'm saying world and environment. Think of it as a space where you experience, so that I try to get them to think about what it feels like to be in a room, to open a door, and then to look down a hallway, and how our sense of where we're at and the sense of space becomes recontextualized, and to hone in on those moments where our perceptions are shifting and use those as metaphors for developing virtual worlds, so that a doorway doesn't have to look like a 6-panel frame. It can look like a shattering window. It can look like something that's expanding, opening up, and inviting you to walk through. So I think that as we think about cognition and how cognition works, we can think of the objects within the environment as guides through the environment and as reflections of experiences that we have in the real world, but not necessarily recreating reality verbatim. And so I think this can impact how we work commercially within the medium, so that it isn't so driven by like the need to shoot up things and the basic tropes that we've really found to be very profitable. I think that there is a real need for connection, a real need for communication, and a real need for the awareness of these levels of communications, and to somehow simulate those in XR. to create rich experiences.
Chris, I'm really intrigued by the format that you shared with National Geographic and the Hydrus, and kind of the notion of shared exploration and co-located experience. I wonder if you could share a bit more about what that attendee experience was like, and reflect on the incredible experience you've had in the kind of broad variety of content you've supported in development.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't at the Grosvenor Auditorium myself, but I attended an impact summit that had a smaller version of that in a room, and there were probably like 25 of us. And those VR experiences when you're in a headset and you're completely immersed and there's no distraction and you're experiencing something that's great. But then you take the headset off, and it's really hard to share that with someone else and explain what you just saw. So when I was sitting in that room and we all had the headset on and we were watching the same thing at the same time, and then we took that headset off, we all looked at each other and we all had like just this visceral emotional response with each other, because we all knew what we had just experienced together, but yet privately. It was a very unique dichotomy of a private experience, but private with everyone else. I kind of think the same as with that experience Where Thoughts Go, where you're sharing, a deep secret and then hearing everyone else's whispered secrets in your headset in this collective kind of way. So I think there's something to play with there, kind of mixing those two, human experiences and making them work together. And we just found overall that the engagement afterwards, the conversation was just, much more lively and more specific questions, and just more investment in learning more when we did that synchronous viewing.
We have time for one more question. I'm seeing, so there's a question about documenting our experiences in extended reality. So I think that is something that's a challenge. I know that Chris, you had mentioned that one of the experiences that you were, referring to, like Where Do Thoughts Go, that already just in a few years, if that was something that, the timeline here is very accelerated. So I'm just wondering if any of you would like to address some of this notion of like, so how do we, with the ephemerality, what happens? How do we retain? And then also the huge turnover and shift in devices and what that means ecologically, for example.
That's a great point. I mean, personally, I am stockpiling heads-up displays full of applications in my house. So I plan to just prep for the future of non-compatibility and deprecated hardware, and just keep a little store myself. That is truly my strategy. But I agree, it's a huge problem that I know for a fact a lot of the really pioneering work, like the first experiences on some of these platforms, including our own, like how are they being preserved, aside from people like me who are a little paranoid and just keeping a bunch of MPKs on devices. Like, I don't think we have a plan as a field. And you look at some new media art, from the 90s, from the 80s, like ages ago, and sometimes all that's left are like a couple like .mov files on like a really old website that you might be able to access using like the Wayback Machine or whatever. It's a lot of this work is just totally lost. It's a moment in time, and it's captured in knowledge and storytelling. And it's also not well historicized. Like even in the last few weeks, I've been preparing material and curriculum for this new narratives lab, and I've had to reach out to people I know and say, hey, what are the canonical works in AR of the last couple decades related to AR in new media art, et cetera, and augmenting place and experience of the last few decades. There's not a lot of like literature, sort of curatorial work around this stuff quite yet, and it's kind of sadly anecdotal.
Yeah, agreed. There's one more question in the Discord I'd like to share out, and then we'll need to wrap up. The question says, as AR/VR becomes more and more a part of our everyday lives, how are we considering the fact that this technology is owned by a few companies that have proven to manipulate our attention and mine our data? Although social distancing and staying home is necessary during COVID, it's a side effect that the most rich and powerful are benefiting and profiting from it. Is the pandemic being used to facilitate more power to big corporations and the state? And if it's benefiting the most powerful, how could those without power ever challenge a return to normal life? And then they quote, there will be so many IP addresses, so many sensors, things that you're wearing, things that you're interacting with that you won't even sense that it'll be a part of your presence all the time. That's a quote from Eric Schmidt, CEO of Google. So I think that we've touched upon this as a panel. I'm just wondering if any of you would primarily like to respond to this attendee's question.
We need competition. It can't be just one or two companies. And as they become more successful, more people will want to get into this space and compete. So that's my hope that, you know, there are other players that come on board because they see that Quest has been so successful and the price point has come down, and you know, I hope that we see a proliferation of other people jumping in this space in different ways and not as ubiquitously as Facebook.
Yeah, yeah.
I'd love to see education change. I mean, critical thinking, where is that in our education? It's gone.
Right.
I mean, so people to be educated to critically understand their place in the world, how they're being manipulated or not, and where they can have control and agency. I just don't see it anywhere, or even not even at third level, right? So that's a massive, massive gap in our education. And until we start educating properly to think about themselves and the world critically, this current model is just going to keep on proliferating. So I'd love that to change as well. Something needs to change there.
Yeah, very much in agreement there. It's being an educator. I can share that it's a huge challenge to make that shift, and very much want to see that happen. Unfortunately, we are out of time. I'm very grateful to all of you, truly, for your generosity in participating and sharing your work in this panel. I want to thank all of the attendees to the conference, thank the conference for this opportunity, and everyone know that the Discord is still happening, and this session was streamed and also recorded. It'll be available on the IEEE VR YouTube channel. So thank you very much, and wishing everyone a good afternoon, morning, evening, wherever we are around the globe. Bye.
Take care, everyone. It was awesome.
Thank you. Amazing.